So how are you guys doing this morning? Having a good morning?
Yeah.
I know my morning's been interesting. Solo parenting is not an easy task, so I have a newfound respect for all solo parents in the world. It's a bit fun sometimes. And I even have, I'm wearing my favorite college university material today because they have a big rivalry game. They have an Iron Bowl, and I'm a firm believer that if I wear their clothing, they're going to win, right? So I haven't checked my phone, but I'm just assuming since, I'm wearing it, they're going to win. So I look forward to checking my phone after this and seeing that Auburn beat Alabama. So very excited about that. But I love our series we've been doing, which has been The Web, and how following Jesus changes everything. I think it's been really good, and for me, it's kind of helped declutter some of the idea around Christianity. Because I don't know about anyone else in the room, sometimes we make Christianity and following Jesus this really, really complicated task. And I don't know if it is that complicated. And I've kind of liked this series because I kind of feel like we've gotten back to basics a bit. So we've kind of gone to the basics and looked at what they are. And this week I'm concluding our series by looking at how we're meant to bear fruit. And to help us unpack this idea, I want to kind of take us on a journey this morning. So we're going to, see if it works, does my remote work? What did my son do? Hold on. You. I knew I shouldn't have let him play with it. You'll have to hit next, I'm sorry. I tried to, this thing doesn't want to work. Or is it my slide? Technical difficulties are the best. I'll just do a dance while we wait. There we go. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey. First, I want to look at the bigger story of Luke chapter 6. And then I want to unpack a story about a tree and its fruit in Luke chapter 6, verses 43 to 45. And then I kind of want to talk about this idea of good and bad fruit that we're going to read about in this teaching. And then after that, I want to talk about some soil testing and church growth. So that's kind of like a roadmap of what we're going to go through this morning, just so you're aware of how the story is going to take place. So let's first dive into this bigger story of Luke. So hit the next slide. I really wish this thing would work. No, it doesn't. Maybe if But yeah, so let's look at this bigger story of Luke. If you've never read Luke chapter 6, there's some really interesting things that happen in this chapter. It's a pretty long chapter. It's a pretty important chapter because there's lots of eye-opening things. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of those things. So on the next slide, you got Jesus making a claim to the Pharisees that he's the Lord of the Sabbath. So there's this incident that happens where the disciples are doing something they shouldn't do on the Sabbath, technically. Pharisees get all cranky about it, and Jesus is pretty much tells them off. And pretty much in telling them off, he kind of claims that he's the Lord of the Sabbath, which is a really big deal because God's the Lord of the Sabbath. So Jesus is claiming that he's God in a sense, which is a big deal if you're around that kind of time. And then after he does that, we read that he goes to do some Mountainside Prayer. So he finds a mountain, goes to the side of a mountain, and he kind of prays about who's going to be in his inner circle. Because he's got this massive following. We sometimes think it was just 12 disciples, but there was lots of disciples following Jesus. And he had this inner circle of ones that he worked the closest with. They got to spend the most time with him. So he's kind of praying about who they are going to be. After he has some time of prayer, we read that he designates the apostles. So the apostles are kind of designated. Picks out his 12. They're going to be in his inner circle. They're going to follow him more closely. They're going to learn from him and all this stuff. And then after this, it says that they go to a level place where he's standing in a level place with the 12 and a big crowd starts to form. And I want to go to the next slide because I think it makes sense of why this big crowd is starting to form. And we read that this big crowd has come from all over the place to see Jesus because it says in Luke 6:19, healing is coming out of him. Now I find that fascinating. I think for me, my first thing is to try to, I got a vivid imagination. So I try to imagine what it looks like for healing coming out of someone. Like they're glowing or something, or maybe there's like an orange gas thing following. I don't know what it looks like. What does it mean to have healing coming out of you? Is it like a fart coming out of you? I don't know. So my imagination just runs wild. But you can see if healing's coming out of him, he's going to have this whole crowd's attention. They're fixated. There's something big happening. They're all kind of leaning in. And then, if we go to the next slide, he begins to teach, having all their attention. And some of the teaching that he goes on is this teaching of blessing and words. And then he moves on to love your enemies, which is a bit out of the ballpark idea. I don't know about anyone else in the room, but I can love people that like me, but people that don't like me or treat me poorly, it's really hard to love them. So this is kind of like an out-of-the-box thing. And then he touches on judging others, right before we get to the section of teaching where he teaches about something I want to look at today. And I honestly think it's no mistake that we read this whole idea of judging others before we get to the teaching I want to look at today. So if we go to the next slide, Luke 6, verse 42. There you go. This is what it says right before we get to verse 43. How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye," when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And if we go to the next slide, I really love that because I feel like Jesus is shifting towards this inward focus. He's kind of done these teachings, and I feel Jesus is a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He's trying to, tell a story. He's trying to guide people along a journey. So I'm not sure he's like, just ab-libbing. Like he's probably got a premeditated idea of where he's taking people. And I think it's no coincidence that he kind of shifts the focus to this inward focus right before we get to a story about a tree and its fruit. So if we go to the next slide, and then the one after that, and we'll dive into this story. Because I think it's really important for us to remember that Jesus is setting the scene for the story by making us take a shift to an inward focus. He's trying to lead everyone there, disciples who are listening, everyone to shift their focus inward. The whole story of judging others is about looking at ourselves first, doing the inner work first. And then we get this story. So let's dive into that. I want to read verse 43 and 44, and this is what it says. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. I don't even know that word. Briars. What's a briar? I just want to say grapevine. Oh, you know what? Jesus is just too smart for me. I can't handle it. Briars. I've learned a new word, briars. I want to pause there for a second. If we go to the next slide, I think Jesus is making something clear to us. He's making it clear that good and bad fruit isn't some academic competition. It's not some mystery that we're never going to know. Because I don't know about anyone else, when it comes to fruit, I don't ever really get confused with the fruit that he described. Like, I know what a grape looks like. I might not know how to say briars, but I know what a grape looks like at least, so I can pick them. I'm not going to mix up a grape and an apple. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge in my mind to figure out which is which. My 3-year-old daughter can tell me if she wants an apple, banana, grape, strawberries, blueberries. So it's not a big, complicated thing. And I feel like he's trying to let us see that this whole idea of good and bad fruit isn't a mystery. It's pretty easy for us to notice. We need to do the inward work and trust ourselves to notice what this good and bad fruit looks like. And then the next verse, he kind of gives a really good indication of what this fruit is. So if we go to the next slide, we read in verse 45, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart. An evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Now that verse is really big to me. It makes me step back a little bit. And if we go to the next slide, I think 3 things really stand out to me about this verse. The first is that good comes from the good stored in our hearts. So apparently our hearts, our inner self can store up good and bad things. And evil comes from the evil stored up in our hearts. And then I kind of like how Jesus kind of shifts it to actions. You know, the heart is full of what the mouth speaks. Now, if we're all honest, I mean, what have been some of the stuff we've said sometimes? Because I know I've said some pretty awful stuff in my life. I don't know about anyone else in the room, but I've said some shocking things. I've said some really good things and uplifting things, but I've said some horrible things. But apparently our heart is full of what the mouth speaks. And it seems that our fruit is based and found in our hearts. Not the mask we wear, not the person we pretend to be, but in our inner being. That's where you're going to find this fruit stored up. That's where you're going to notice what fruit we have stored up. And I want to go to the next slide, because I think you might still be having some questions about good and bad fruit. What does that look like? And I kind of have just a couple definitions and examples I want to share with you. So if we go to the next one, I think good fruit... Oh, we went too far. That one. Now, good fruit is a manifestation of God's love. None of that sounds really big and wordy. I thought it was fancy when I wrote it. I was like, look at me, manifestation, go Matt. But here are some examples of what I think a manifestation of God's love is. And Barry, if you just hit, I think it's the arrows, it should go to the next one. We'll see how we go. Oh, there we go. So here's some examples. I think one of the first ones is acceptance. Let's be clear there, acceptance is not agreeing. I'm not saying that, but acceptance is inviting someone to the table, hearing their story. I think another thing is unconditional love. Having this love for people that isn't set on certain terms or what they do, it's unconditional. Inclusiveness, another thing of inviting people in, welcoming people, acknowledging their divine image. A sense of value when you're with people, you'll give them that sense of value. We all have sat across people before that we can sit at a table and they make us feel better after we're done having a conversation. They make us feel valued. I think another thing is an ability to break down cultural barriers. Look at the work of compassion, some of the amazing stuff and humanitarian stuff that goes on that breaks down those cultural barriers. I think another thing, which is hard for me to say, but is being the first to say sorry. I think that's a good fruit to have. I think that's a manifestation of God's love. And it's hard for me to do, and I'm glad Kim's not here, so she'll probably watch this, and hopefully I'm not around when she watches it, but I struggle to be the first one to say sorry. That's a hard thing for me. Humility, showing empathy, being compassionate, empowering the voice of the marginalized. We see it over and over again in Jesus' stories of the gospel. He gives voice to the voiceless. He sits with the people that were rejected, that were exiled. We choose joy. We did a whole series about joy and this whole idea of joy, and it's something really beautiful when you unpack what that means with God. And we create a safe and welcoming place for others. Because I think the grace of God is a big thing. That's one of the biggest things Jesus shows. So we got to have that as a clear example for producing this good fruit. If we go to the next slide, I think bad fruit is obscurity of God's love. It's like a distortion. Some examples of that, if we go to the next one, would be conditional love. So see, they should come up. There you go. So having love with conditions. Saying, oh, I'm going to love my kids until Caleb gives me lip. Then I don't love them anymore. That kind of love. Which, if anyone was here this morning, they would have heard Caleb giving me sass from like the moment he walked in to the moment he went to kids' church. So I love that kid. He is fiery. He is going to be an amazing leader one day. Another fruit, though, is thoughtlessness. Not thinking of other people's stories, just sharing. Devaluation, devaluing other people that you sit with. We've all had those people we've sat with that we leave, and they make us feel like we're not good enough. Building up cultural barriers and divides, refusing to say sorry, pridefulness, apathy, uncompassionate, silencing the voice of the marginalized, choosing misery and choosing just wallow in our own self-pity and woe is me and life is so bad and just resting in that all the time and creating a dangerous and unwelcoming place. Now, I think if we were honest, we all bear both of those kind of fruits at times. I'd love to say I only produce the good stuff, but that's a lie. There's so many times I refuse to say sorry. There's so many times I'm judgmental to other people. I know there's times I've sat with people and I've made them feel like they're not valuable. I know there's times with my kids I haven't provided enough grace. And I think if we want to get serious about the kind of fruit that we're producing, we have to do some hard work. We have to do some soil testing. So if we go to the next slide, and then the one after. Because I don't know a lot about gardening. If anyone knows me, I kill plants. I don't help plants survive. Kim planted some flowers, and I think I've killed... Yeah, there's 3 or 4 that I'm pretty sure are dead. I also waterlogged some of her plants. She told me to mist them, and I forgot. I was just pouring water in there, and now they're like squishy. Like in the pot, like you're not supposed to give them lots of water. So I'm not a good gardener. So like but I know a little bit. I know that it's important that we do our soil testing. Because I know the soil makes a big difference. When you plant anything, you gotta have the right kind of soil. And I think it's important for us to do our soil testing within instead of looking outside. A lot of times as Christians and followers of Christ, we can sometimes look at other people, trying to do soil testing for everyone else. But we got to go back to what Jesus said about judging others and doing the inner work ourselves first. Doing our own kind of soil testing before we look outside. Because if we look outside too much, I think it causes pain and hurt. And I think as Christians, we have been focusing too much on others and their soil testing, which is why if we go to the next slide, church growth, the struggle is real. So I like that little title. I did that for my oldest brother, Chris. He always used to say the struggle is real as a kid. But the struggle is real for church growth. Churches aren't growing. It's not a mystery. They're shrinking. More and more churches are closing their doors. And I mean, if we look at the 2011 census, so if we go to the next slide, it said that there was a 22% decrease in Christianity. A 48% decrease in church attendance. It's almost 50%. I don't know about anyone else in the room, but those statistics hurt me to read. And I'd love to say the next census is going to show that everything's changed and church is growing again, but I think we can all be kind of honest that it doesn't appear to be that way. And I believe, if we go to the next slide, The way of Christ should be attractive and produce fruit that others notice and are blessed by, which helps them do their own soil testing. And we all know those people that have sat with us in life, that have journeyed with us through the hard times, that have helped us grow as a person. And I don't know about anyone else in the room, but it's usually not the person that I sit with and for the first 5 minutes, they're like, Matt, you're awful at this. You don't do this well. You need to work on this. You need to fix this. They're usually people that just sit with me, that get to know me, that are honest, that let me share my struggles and don't make me feel like I'm a horrible person for it. They hold space for it. And I feel as a church, that's what we should be. The way of Christ is meant to be something attractive. It was growing everywhere back in the day. The early movement of Jesus, everyone was picking it up because it was something different. It was making everyone lean in. They were seeing the love these communities have. And I want to, again, say these communities weren't agreeing. If you want to read the epistles, you can read an epistle by Peter, having one kind of framework of theology, and then you can read an epistle by Paul, which has a little bit of a different framework of theology. And there was heated debates over and over again in Acts. They didn't agree on everything, but they somehow were able to love. And people saw that love. They saw this fruit, this good fruit. And it's my dream that the church becomes that. Because I don't know about anyone else, but I am tired of befriending people outside the church and getting to know them. And as soon as I tell them I'm a Christian or I'm a pastor, you're not like other Christians. I'm tired of hearing that statement. I think as Christians, we should be a place that's welcoming people. We should be known for our love. I hope one day that I can do something really nice for friends and, instead of showing up for my friend who's not a Christian, doesn't know what they think about God, has this amazing life story and things that happen, and I do something nice to them, I'd love for him to say, instead of saying, oh, you're not like most Christians, I'd love for him to say, you're like most Christians I meet. You guys really do love well. That would be awesome if we were known for that. If we were able to produce that good fruit. Because we are supposed to bear fruit when we follow the way. Jesus makes that clear. He even tells his disciples to test things. He even talks about how, a good tree is going to produce good fruit. Bad tree won't. There you go. There's a good way to notice. It's not a mystery. You guys can figure it out. Do the inner work and you'll see what fruit's being produced. There are reasons that we read these gospel stories and over and over again, there's crowds around Jesus. Jesus never shows up in a city and they're like, oh, I'm getting out of here. There's that judgmental Jesus guy. I'm done. No, Jesus is there for the marginalized, for the hurt, for the oppressed. And I think that's what we should be doing. And I think sometimes Jesus always pointed at the Pharisees and the religious leaders that they needed to do some work. They needed to do some inner work. And I feel that Jesus would be doing the same now. So I hope as a church that we're able to dive in, do some of the inner work on ourselves so we can bear this good fruit that Jesus is calling us to bear. And I just want to close in prayer and invite Alan back up just to lead us in one last song of worship. God, I just thank you so much for who you are. I pray that you'll help us as followers of Christ to do the inner work, to look at ourselves, to see what fruit we're producing, to sit and rest in you so we're able to produce good fruit. to invite you into all the spaces in our hearts. Have your Spirit move. And I pray that you'll help us as a church show the community around us your amazing love. Show them the amazing good fruit that's produced when we follow the way of Christ. In your amazing name, amen.